Total Fund Portfolio Management Hub. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We are launching our pilot Thought Leadership Executive Series. Introduction to Integrated Total Fund Management with Mihail Garchev, former VP and Head of Total Fund Management at BCI. Hosted by Leo Kolivakis, publisher of Pension Pulse.
Good day, everybody. This is Mihail here again. This is now week 8 of the introduction to the Integrated Total Fund Management Executive Series. And what follows is our next episode 6. For those of you who are watching the series for the first time or haven't been around for a while, this is a quick look at the topics we're covering in this 7-episode series. Episode 6 today concludes the topic of Total Fund Management implementation and is the last episode before the grand finale of episode 7, where we'll discuss the role of Total Fund Management as part of the next stage of development of the Canadian pension model. In episode 3, for the first time, we introduced the roadmap of the series, which helps us navigate through the wealth of topics already discussed. The roadmap starts with the organizational and investment beliefs which determine the strategy and the objectives. We discussed both in the first 3 episodes of the series. Over the last 4 weeks, we started exploring how to implement Total Fund Management, and we looked at the framework and the process to underpin the beliefs and the strategy. We also illustrated in practice some of the conclusions from the framework and process episodes using 11 engaging case studies on Total Fund Management. Today, we will conclude the implementation section of our roadmap discussion of what's needed to turn the framework and the process into a capability. But ultimately, it's not about Total Fund Management itself, as it is a mean to an end, and this end is the Canadian Pension Model 2.0, which is intended to further extend the efficiency and effectiveness of the current model. We'll look at this in the last episode 7 next week. So this is our episode 6 today. And we have a wealth of seemingly unrelated topics to talk about. But don't worry, everything will fall into place. We'll talk about what capability actually is. And we'll talk about the least served client in the organization. We'll have a short Greek tragedy in 5 parts. It's Leo's blog, after all. And we'll talk about the realities in many organizations today. Don't worry, these are not in your organization. Or are they? Then we'll talk about why the Total Fund implementation often fails. And I'll share with you some of the learnings from past mistakes. But it's also important to talk where to go and what to do to succeed. And we'll talk about the fine art of leapfrogging and sketch out a game plan of what you can actually do. And finally, we'll have one last, I hope, case study as a clear example of a macro capability. And I'll give you a hint, it's a wordplay, but the case study is actually real. So we'll talk next about an integrated total fund management framework. Actually, scratch that. It's about capability. We spent so much time talking about the framework, a process. We had all these case studies. But even if you have your framework and a process, you're not even close, because this does not give you a capability, period. Capability is so much more than a framework or a process. It requires a methodology which supports the framework. It also requires the proper technology to enable both the framework, the methodology, but also the investment process. Nothing could be done without the people, and total fund management capability also requires a proper organizational structure. And having all these still does not do all the job because you need a platform. Technology alone is not enough. You need a way to be able to interact with the methodology, with the framework, with the technology, and interact between people as well and making decisions. And you need a platform so that you're able to interact both with data, ideas, or people. And finally comes the element of implementation and ongoing management. And one needs to get all these pieces right, not only their place, but also their interrelationship, links, and logical connections. Oh, and I forgot, in a very well thought out and forward-looking manner as well, because you need this to be efficient and effective, but also to serve the future, not only the current day. And total fund management capability starts with what every CIO or investment committee needs: a properly structured decision-making process. And the key elements of such decision-making process are the need to identify the very need for a decision, ability to gather the relevant information, internal, external, add past experiences as well, identify possible paths of actions or alternatives, look at all the evidence, whether it's data, whether it's discretionary, whether it's prior experiences, being able to attach some kind of probability or confidence levels and detect potential biases. And all these things are inputs to this decision-making process, which ultimately yields the outputs, of course, arriving at a decision, but also ability to evaluate consequences, take action, and evaluate results and feedback loop to the initial need as well. And not surprisingly, all these connected pieces of the capability puzzle are there to enable this efficient decision-making process. So what it is that CIOs really, really want? Besides the nice but a little bit complex picture of efficient decision-making, they want to be able to make informed and consistent rather than ad hoc decisions. And don't get me wrong, ad hoc decisions are often needed, especially in situations of crisis and situations where it's not about the return on capital, but it's simply put about the return of capital and preserving the company as well. But generally, there are a few very simple things, or at least simple in as a desire, that CIOs really want. So decisions need to have a clear and consistent framework. So everything should be very clear why we're doing this and where is it coming from. Everything is very complex, unfortunately. So the ability to reduce the inherent complexity to a simple and intuitive process goes a long way to good decision making and also a buy-in into the decisions as well. There has to be personal accountability, follow-up, and focus. It has to be people dedicated to doing this so that the CIO knows that all this process is being looked at in a very consistent and disciplined manner. So this goes back to what we showed in episode 1 about the need for a dedicated function, and not just function buried somewhere in the organization, but a function that has the CEO and the board support and representation at a most senior level in the organization. And finally, one needs the ability to implement all the decisions, ability to manage these decisions and monitor these on a daily basis, and the ability to have a platform where a platform is simply the ability to actually quickly see where things are, quickly answer questions or get different perspectives on issues of interest. So this is, in simple words, what CIOs really want. So now let's dig a little bit deeper into these 5 high-level needs of every CIO. So let's look at the requirements checklist. So the first thing that's needed is a structured and repeatable, meaning disciplined process. It has to be also replicable, not a black box. It has to be timely and dynamic. It needs to integrate the assets in a consistent manner, which means that the way or the conclusions you arrive, for example, for equities, need to be made in a way consistent with the way you arrive at conclusions for bonds, for example. You also need to be able to change perspective. So you need to be able to look at asset classes, but then, reverse the camera, if you wish, and look at sectors or themes or countries. So the ability to, look at kind of slice and dice this information and look at different perspectives and different aggregations and what does it mean. It has to have sufficient asset representation. So it's not just having 5 assets and call it a day. No, this is about the ability to actually have much more granularity, both horizontal granularity into different asset classes and sectors and factors and capital structure and capitalizations, but also being able to have this vertical granularity across, let's say, different geographies, for example. So we talked a lot about all this in the framework discussion, but its ability to have this multiple view of the multiple drivers of asset classes and assets in general, and they're driven by different things at different time horizons. So this is important to be able to actually differentiate between horizons and drivers of return. Again, it's not only about the absolute expected returns, and we talked about these expected returns quite a lot already, but it's also about the relative ones, because sometimes it's not about the absolute number that matters, but what matters is really the relative expectations. And of course, incorporating risk in all this is also important. We already have beaten to death the topic of the term structure of expected returns, and this is really this linking to different horizons. Already we talked about the ability to be able to change the perspective, and you cannot do this unless you really have a proper technological platform to do this, not only to store information or to process and to visualize information, but also to arrive at next level insights, whether it's going to be information or even decisions. And finally, we talked about the role of having personal accountability, follow-ups, and focus, and the dedicated function, and of course, the C-suite support. And all these requirements are linked to the different parts of what constitutes the total fund management capability, whether it's the methodology, technology, platform, or organizational structure, and all this within the context of framework and a process. So who is this person up there? It could be quite lonely at the top. And this person is the CIO, sometimes the least served client in the organization. And it could also be quite foggy looking downhill. And of course, you get the analogy. So why are you, Mihail, saying that the CIO is the least served client in the organization? Isn't he or she at the top and an executive in the organization? And the reason why I'm saying this is because oftentimes the lower levels of the organization have their own databases, their knowledge about the data and understanding of the data, and kind of a quick look, even at the asset class level, their own systems and so on and so forth. The real trouble comes when a request comes from an executive, let's say the CIO in this case, to aggregate data into something that needs to lead to decisions. So does this sound familiar to you in a way? So I'm going to illustrate it in this Greek tragedy in 5 parts. And this is a definition of what a Greek tragedy is, where the protagonist, usually a person of importance and outstanding personal qualities, falls to disaster through circumstances with which he or she cannot deal. Does this sound familiar? And these are the 5 parts of our little Greek tragedy. Part 1, the request. Part 2, of data lakes and data swamps. Part 3, the Excel and the brave analyst. Part 4, the beautification. Part 5, the report. It all starts on a beautiful Thursday end of day, just a day before the weekend, and suddenly the executive, the CIO, has a request, and this request is urgent. So what happens then? Then everybody runs into the systems and scrambles to get the information the CIO wanted. And that's where you get from data lakes and drown in data swamps. But finally, sometime early afternoon on Friday, everything is fine. The exported messy data is now finally in Excel. And this is where the part 3 comes in, the Excel and the brave analyst. And usually you have a young and courageous analyst who rushes in to clean and organize all the data. The analysts have the skills, Excel skills, some little R programming on the side, and trying to make sense of all this data that came from the data swamps and put it in something that you can actually create a report out of. And this is a brave analyst indeed. Then, late Friday evening, the realization comes that you have the data and possibly the conclusions, but Excel is ugly, so let's make it nice. And that's where the beautification process starts. And of course, at some point, we need to make a nice report. So we need a logo, and there you go, you have your logo. And then we have the same senseless stock photo added, usually a pen and a notebook or something like this. And there you have it, your nice report. We made it. Thank God we had the weekend to produce it. And this is the end of our improvised Greek tragedy. The CIO finally gets his information needed for his Monday meeting after several days, and we have to thank the weekend again. This shouldn't happen in multi-billion organizations. I decided to give this story a little cinematic spin after reading some papers by Ken Akoundi from Cordatius. Ken is the founder and chief knowledge officer of Cordatius, and in his own words, Cordatius is about the belief in the power of technology to transform the investment offices. So investors have fallen too far behind the technology curve, and they're at crossroads. They need a spark to modernize and evolve the investment office. Ken certainly knows his stuff, given his extensive experience as a PhD and a programmer and quant at JP Morgan, head of pension strategies at Deutsche Bank, and chief knowledge officer at Risk Matrix, to name a few. A lot of the things Ken wrote deeply resonated with me. I experienced such situations many times. And he has put his thoughts so eloquently, I even chuckled for a bit. So I decided to reference some of his brilliant insights here and there in the next section. Really, if you're struggling with some of these issues I'm describing, definitely reach out to Ken. And I didn't know Ken before. I just read the papers, so this is not a promotion of any time. It's really, brilliant papers and brilliant ideas, and it's somebody who really probably could help a lot in your thought process to start with. We talked a bit earlier what CIOs want. Let's look at what CIOs really get. And despite the shiny glass and steel, the modern shiny glass and steel office behind, you still get this patchwork that's happening across the organizations. Ken actually described it beautifully. So it's asset rich, but technology poor. And having this patchwork of processes and technologies may eventually, unfortunately, impact decisions. So what is it that CIOs really get today? And if you're not tangled in the patchwork of processes and technologies, and you have a good sleep, skip the next 4 slides. If not, then read on. So what are some of the bigger challenges in the CIO offices? First, this is the lack of continuity. So every new administration would bring their own reset, whether it's going to be a new head of IT or chief operating officer, or even a bigger global organizational change like a CEO or CIO. The minute this changes, there's a new plan and a new projects and new ideas coming in, maybe rightfully so, but there's this lack of continuity in the organizations. The second one is that temporary is forever. There are all these big bang initiatives, but everything is a little bit like waiting for Godot. And meanwhile, the temporary is forever. Fixes and patches and updates, they're there to stay. And there always help, and service providers are often, offering their help. But there is a lot of inertia in this, or they're trying to provide direct influence to some of the decisions, and oftentimes stretch promises. There's this concept of, or the situation rather, of where some are more equal than others. And this is when the annual budget process starts and you have all the budget constraints that are put forward, but also, let's admit it, there's a lot of prioritizations, whichever way these are done. And in these situations, oftentimes different groups and even asset classes decide to tactically withdraw on their own, and everybody tactically takes care of their own needs until the bigger and the better comes. The big bang comes, and everybody regroups then, if they ever do. There's also this topology primer. So how many times you've heard about data lakes and data pools, but in reality, they all look more like data swamps. There's a lot of data and it's being dumped, and a lot of promises done about universal data treatment across the organization. But this rarely happens, if at all. And then everybody wants to make consistent and coherent decisions, and this is great. But making these decisions with inconsistent and incoherent data, I don't think so. I'd say it's difficult, or if not outright dangerous. Having this mentality of think global, act local leads, unfortunately, to many applications and small systems spread all over the organization. And this now, so that people can make these things work, it requires a patchwork of interfaces to effectively translate data from or between incompatible systems and applications. So this is an endless patchwork of these interfaces that is spread across organizations. Another aspect is timeliness. So how many times one would present a 30-day late information? A week is great, but a 30-day late information, and in many instances, there would be even a quarter late one. So are you ready to make decisions now? Another aspect is mistakes. So having all these systems spread around with all these incompatibilities and inconsistencies leads to mistakes. And sometimes we'll hear perfection is the enemy of good, and 500 million here and there, missed does not matter much. Things don't reconcile, we'll do it at the end of the month, don't worry. So what happened to the fiduciary responsibility to safeguard the beneficiary's assets? And then a crisis hits. And as Ken eloquently puts it, now all these problems become from a headache to an acute migraine. So then the CIO starts to ask the question, where is my war room? Which data to believe? Who will compile it quickly? What am I reporting to the stakeholders? Is my process really institutionally robust and not just Excel heroics? And even more so with work from home and all these other challenges, are we really prepared for this? And then there is this struggle within, the fear of losing the relevance or job, and all the good things that come with it, being high salaries, benefits, pensions. So believe it or not, there is this resistance sometimes to introducing more integrated systems and straightforward processing and automation. And it's interesting because this is a piece that came out of a business plan SWOT analysis of a invest-tech company. And what they write is actually looking at our own business through somebody's, third party's eyes. And what they wrote is that, talking about competition, however, the real competitor might not actually be another external software company, but other entities within the customer itself or customer stakeholders. This is likely to include anyone with a vested interest in either being part of a successful game-changing outcome or not wanting a successful outcome, entities which are losers in this process. The obvious candidate in both cases is the strategy and research teams within prospect clients, but equally it can extend to client suppliers as well. So this is just a third party, how other people see some of the dynamics that are happening in some of our organizations. And then you have, another nightmare, which is the information overload. Having too much data and too much noise that comes with this data. And it's really hard to know where to focus the energy and time. And again, with too much data and too much noise comes the ability to always find something to confirm your case. No matter what your thought is, you'll find something to back it up. And this is really about the need to safeguard against cognitive biases. So subconsciously making selective use of data, or another instance of this is being or feeling rather pressure to decide by powerful or more knowledgeable peers, especially in a committee setting. And this is a very, unfortunately, powerful driver of decisions, although probably a wrong one. And finally, a good decision-making process also needs this healthy tension, or the ability to complement discretionary thinking with objective facts and conclusions based on different confirming or contradicting signals. And last but not least, it's always good to have something that that's kind of gives you a real perspective on past decisions, or decisions you could have made but you didn't. And this is what I'm referring here to as door locks are to keep honest people honest. So having a decision model portfolios running in parallel is very helpful to learn from past decisions and circumstances. Of course, this brings now the instance of accountability, and sometimes this might not necessarily be something that people would want, but they have to, because otherwise you cannot have a proper, disciplined and structured process, and certainly not an efficient process either. So there's a lot of efficiency and cost buried in these grounds. And we talked about these economies of scope and second order efficiencies. And this is just one example where some of these efficiencies are really buried at the intersection of technology and decision making. Every CIO wants to unlock the potential of their organizations. But can they really, given all these challenges? Being lost in a maze of global macro and cross-asset impacts, research, analysis, and recommendations overload, and oftentimes they find themselves running against time or operational and expertise hurdles. And of course, failure is not an option. But if failure is not an option, then why organizations often fail at total fund management? This is a long list. I'm having 12 points here, and I'm pretty sure you can add many more points from your personal experience. But here are some thoughts about why organizations often fail at total fund management. First, there is this failure to understand and communicate the critical role. So there's no clear acceptance, buy-in, and support from the organization. Having money is not enough, unfortunately. So this is the whole concept of asset rich and technology poor. There are many other factors at play. It also, oftentimes people start without a clear game plan and a strategy. Yes, there's a business plan and there's some strategy, but not really. Sometimes people start without clarity on the budget, hiring, and other resources. You also need a proper team in place as well. And oftentimes people don't realize that this whole idea of internalizing doesn't necessarily always mean build internally. There are other things that internalize might mean. And in the effort to create this acceptance and excitement about the project, there are stretched upfront promises versus the realistic business case of it. Time matters, and underestimating time leads to this project fatigue, which sets in a year or two. People lose patience. There's a loss of credibility as well. And we all think, we have this, great project and everybody is buying in and is going to support us. And that may be the case, but also we tend to overestimate the IT and operations support and systems ability. And a very important point, actually, which people kind of take for granted, is the data integration and the data capability more generally. And this leads to drowning in the data swamps. And also, oftentimes you would see these undertows of internal resistance, the popular expression, let them fail, and things like this. And when I was thinking about all these points, I kind of gotten into this gloomy mood about all this. And a song came to my mind, which is called The Origins of Ruin. And it's by a band that I like a lot. And I just decided that the cover of the album fits very well with the whole idea about how challenging and sometimes sad the process of trying to get total fund management could be. And to be honest with you, the Origins of Ruin song is a very short and very, very sad song. So if you have experienced this emotional roller coaster of excitement earlier and fear of failure with the previous slide, especially if you searched YouTube to listen to the Origins of Ruin song of the appropriately named band Redemption, let me bring you up. Any challenge has its solution. So the next sections are all about the art of leapfrogging. How can we achieve this capability? Can we leapfrog? And the answer is yes, but one needs to be strategic about it. Of course, you know who this is. There is a very good reason we have Steve Jobs here. This is because the concept of the iPhone as a product and technology illustrates one of the biggest mistakes investment offices venturing into improving their technology, data, and decision-making processes do. They're not focusing on the right thing to do. Apple did not produce the iPhone parts. These already existed. So it's not about trying to produce, the iPhone screen or camera or microchip. It's about combining different parts into a new and different product, is what made the iPhone what we know it today. And there is a great reason why this is an important example, because many of the investment offices and organizations generally maybe thinking that having the resources is everything. They venture into trying to produce all these parts: the display, the processor, the screen, the battery, and that's probably the wrong thing to do. Many of these pieces, now of course you need to translate it into what we're talking about, but many of these pieces or services or capabilities exist elsewhere. What needs to be done is to focus on something else, bringing these different pieces together in a product and in an environment, and making it so that it works specifically for the needs of the organization. Remember the long list in the Origins of Failure slide. You have to seriously think about all the things listed there and develop strategies around how you can actually bypass or manage all these challenges. So in a very simple way, you need to bypass the years needed to integrate data, build infrastructure, a platform, and whatnot, which actually might never be built. And you'll spend significant money, hire more people, and people will get tired of waiting, and eventually you will lose credibility and never accomplish what you wanted to do in the first place. So instead, you need to find the proverbial iPhone parts that you need. You need to find a proper operating system, or what would be the platform that you'll be using and the platform that you'll be putting all these iPhone parts onto. You definitely need a strategic partner. You might need to seed capital. You need the ability of efficient data management, which you probably don't have internally anyway. And also there's a lot of need for knowledge capital, because no matter whether you can hire smart people, there are smarter people at the outskirts of all these industries, and they're at the front of everything new that's happening. So focusing on, so you need to focus on what having one iPhone will help you accomplish, and accomplish across many functions, not only the specific things that you want to accomplish. And after all, total fund management is about this improving efficiencies and this concept of economies of scope. And then really do the things that you really need to do. Don't do the strategic mistake of trying to build each iPhone part separately in-house. This is not what internalizing means. What you really need to focus on is methodology, strategy, decisions, and portfolio construction. This is really where your input is critical, and everything else you can actually acquire in different strategic ways. And finally, you want to be able to implement it in the first place, and you want to have it actionable sooner. So you don't have really the luxury of 3-5 years building and promises and never really accomplishing anything. So equipped with the key concepts that we discussed so far, what are the things to consider, the more specific things to consider in your game plan? So let's first talk about systems. And the title of this slide is Rethink Your Systems. And you would say right away, I mean, we already have systems. Doesn't this do the job? So let's talk a little bit about this. So most of the systems you may have, they are risk systems, whether it's Bata, Axioma, Aladdin, and so on and so forth. They do what they're supposed to do, but these are really risk systems. They're mostly for reporting, compliance, or reactive to specific situations or requests. And I know risk is an important part of the investment decisions. That is true. But risk systems are not decision systems, although they are an important contributor. What you really need is a decision system to evaluate the return expectations. So you can make investment decisions, or most of the time, based on expectations about return, not necessarily expectations about the risk. Of course, this is not to say there are no situations where risk becomes primary, but most of the time it's about returns. It's not about risk. And you don't probably have a system. Again, I'm talking about a system. I'm not talking about a spreadsheet thing that you might have. So you don't have a decision system about return expectations. And again, this is not only about return expectations in isolation, like I mentioned, some kind of a, nice Excel spreadsheet, or I should put it, beautified Excel spreadsheet, but as part of a coherent and consistent macro and market valuation framework, monetary credit cycle, liquidity, sentiment, and thematic input, to name a few. So that's really a decision system you need. And what we've discussed since episode 3 and onward about this total fund management framework, this is really a blueprint for what such a decision system might look like. So some of the established risk systems names have woken up to the need for decision systems, but maybe they're too big to be able to address this need, maybe not. They have older technology and architecture, which might be difficult to adapt. And many of them are also cash cows for their shareholders. So a lot of effort went into building these systems early on. So now is the time to actually get the benefit out of these systems. So also, one needs to be careful with stretch promises, which are often used to tame requests by users. So there's always need for new things, and you always get this, yeah, we're working on this, yeah, we're going to have something in 6 months, and so on and so forth. But this rarely happens. And even if it happens, it stalls for different reasons and might not even become a fully fledged functionality to start with. So that said, they do have money, they do have market share, they do have talent, and they can make acquisitions. And whoever really thinks strategically over there at these providers, they could actually be one of the first in this space. And this space, this is really something that's not explored just yet, and we'll see this in a second. So let's talk about costs and being strategic and creative about it. So although many may have the budget, building something like this in-house could be very expensive, and considering all the aspects, it could easily go like 60 to 100 million, and then you have all the aspects of expertise, people, developers, to name a few. So what could you do about all this? A solution may be to have a strategic partner, seed capital, build a custom-made system, and then enhance it through your experience, and that's the important part, try to commercialize it, to create an actual product out of it, not just for your use, but for a more general industry use to offset cost. And of course, your name will help the promotion and the marketing of such a product as well. So you need to consider acquisitions, and the next couple of slides will talk more about it. And also to build it in a modular fashion so that it could serve multiple client bases and purposes. So for example, let's say a total fund management platform or a system which could serve pension funds, asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, even family offices, insurance companies, advisors, consultants. It could be a form of an outsourced CIO, but also basis for portfolio product offerings. And this is something that if it's built in a modular way, you can create different configurations of it so that it serves different purposes. So all these things, if you think about it, invest upfront and then create a product and commercialize this product and offset the initial costs. And then you get your custom-made system as well, on top of many other benefits, which I'll talk about a bit later. So this might be a way to turn the cost from a foe to a friend. Now, remember, an investment decision-making system is not something that you could go and simply purchase from an existing, it's not an off-the-shelf solution that you could purchase from an existing provider. This is a new area which more and more would be the focus of the industry. So you need to equip yourself with a little bit of a startup risk mentality and think in more strategic terms about it. And of course, you can, wait for 3-5 years until you probably be able to purchase such a product, and who knows where things will be by then. But if you really want to do something strategic about it, these are some of the thoughts around what's going on in this market and what could be some of some possibilities there. So this fintech or invest tech or wealth tech market, as it's being called, is highly fragmented, with a very high potential for consolidation and a winner takes it all type of structure. So there are many small entrepreneurships, like one or two brilliant brains who came up with a brilliant idea and brilliant ideas. And all these ideas are actually very pertinent for the total fund management process, but any investment decision process as well. Now, this is the good news. The bad news is that most of them would probably never succeed unless somehow their idea and their product, and their ideas and their products are integrated and brought onto bigger platforms, or whatever these platforms are. But chances are they won't be able to actually make anything out of these ideas, because they might have 5-10 clients at best, and this might be enough for them, but this is very difficult to make it something bigger. Of course, hopefully it would in some unicorn cases, but generally that won't be the case. So such firms can only survive if they have a financially stable backupper with the potential to further commercialize the business activity, via partnerships, acquisitions, or indirectly via product development and industry presence. So this is this whole idea that whoever is able to be first in this space and correctly have the right mindset, the right framework, and the right general platform, and start scooping up these different great ideas and being able to actually put them on a platform, but again, not just put them, and we'll talk about this concept of aggregation versus integration, but in any case, able to actually make something structured out of it. This will be the winner takes it all situation. And granted, even then, even bigger company might come and buy out this already consolidated product. And this is a good news. So as long as there is interest and there's a bigger company to purchase and to buy out the ideas, there's benefit to everybody in this food chain, if you wish. And the next two slides are just quick references to the busy and fragmented market structure and different vantage points of it. And of course, there are many more niche companies and entrepreneurships, which you even won't find on any such map like this. And of course, looking at all these small companies, the question still remains, which one would disappear, survive, or be bought out next month? Remember in the earlier slide where we have the iPhone example and what Apple did, we talked about the fact that Apple didn't build the parts of the iPhone. However, Apple had two main things. One was the idea and the concept of what they need the iPhone to do, taking pictures, sending messages, checking emails, checking internet and whatnot. And the other one is they had their operating system. So the operating system is really one of the things, or the analogy of the operating system rather, is one of the things that it's very important if one wants to venture into this process of developing a total fund management capability. So yes, you can acquire things in the market, different small products, ideas, but how you integrate them onto one platform and what this platform looks like is one of the most important decisions to start with, because without it, there's not much use of trying to venture into something like this. So how to think about all this? So this is your iPhone operating system. So the first thing is about thinking about it as an open versus locked, the concept of open versus locked platforms. And with all the technology, methodologies, tools evolving exponentially, you really need an open platform where users can generate their own investment insights. So you don't need a closed anything that's closed and which not sufficiently allowing for expressing different views by the users. So also it needs to be open to third-party vendors' content, be it data, thematic research, broker views, economic forecasts. So it has to have this capability to integrate with other vendors' content, but also to integrate with your own intelligence, whether it's internal views, whether it's insights, whether it's some specific proprietary data that might come from portfolio companies maybe, and things like this. And then use this to build your own signals, strategies, decision variables, and things like this. So another thing is that all these pre-built tools and frameworks need to be open to customization of inputs and preferences by the user. So this goes back to the first need to users being able to generate their own insights. And of course, we talked a lot about it, but all these methodologies and inputs, whether it's frameworks, tools, or anything systematic, needs to be 100% open and transparent to users. So you need a white box type of methodology, not a black box. Black box could be exciting and mysterious with whatever's inside it, whatever advanced being marketed as being inside it. But after all, if you want something that you could expand, control, and understand and explain, you definitely need a white box methodology and framework. So, of course, which type is your current system, if you actually have one in the first place? The other important question about your iPhone operating system is the question of aggregation versus integration. So this question is key, so please do not skip this slide. Aggregation means adding things and making it easy to access them. Integration means adding things, but also making things internally coherent and consistent. So any platform, although new, can aggregate things. You just, you can add them and, so to speak, beautify them. And they're all sitting in a platform. They could have, nice links to them, and you click and you get and see it. That's all fine. You can beautify them. And even if a system is an open one, it doesn't mean that it's an integrated one. Yes, it's an open one. You can link things and put them on your platform, but it's not an integrated one. Aggregation is handy, but it's also easily replicable. So from a business proposition, this might be not a very good idea, or it's a good proposition for an existing large platform, which just makes it better as has more things on it. But it's an inferior total fund management proposition, because what total fund management needs is an integrated, coherent and consistent framework. And I'll illustrate this in the next few slides. Let's look at this example. So let's say You have you have many external small but brilliant services, and you want to add them. So you have your platform, your core operating system, the platform, your startup investment, or whichever way you call it. And then you have your core capability on this platform, which in the case of total fund management, we established that this core capability is the ability to link macro and market to assets and have different horizons. And this is what we're illustrating on this slide. And then you have these very promising small external services, which could be any type, but let's say for the sake of the example, you have a thematic service, something that talks about themes and how themes impact assets. Then you have, let's say, a stress testing service, which is how environments and events might impact assets. And then you have, for example, a service that I've called it a broker view service, but think about it as the information that you can extract by consolidating different views from multiple broker sources, and what conclusions can you add up, can you get from this service. And these are all important pieces of information that would inform that could inform your investment process. And you really, it's great to have them. So you really want to put them on your platform. And there you have them. They're on your platform now, but they're not linked. So this is really what aggregation means. You have the services, they're on your platform. You can access them through beautiful links, but that's pretty much, you're just looking at separate pieces of information. They're not linked. Now imagine that having your core capability, this link between macro market assets and horizons that you have as a primary capability on your platform, you could then link this core capability with each one of the thematic of the services, be it thematic, stress testing, or broker views. Just link the core capability with these services and also triangulate between the services themselves. Now this is what I described as integration, and this is really what you need for a total fund management process. And a very simple, and maybe not that simple example for that matter, but if you can link assets and horizons to macro and market, which was the core total fund management framework, and then you can link thematic to assets or broker views to assets, this implicitly means that the assets being kind of in the middle, or the interface between these services, now you can establish the third link between macro and market and between your thematic or macro and market and the stress testing or the broker views. So now you create this interface that allows you to link all these different services together. And this is really what we mean by integration. This has much higher value than just acquiring services and putting them on a platform and having a beautiful front end and links, but things are not internally consistent. And you cannot get different perspectives, different views, change the perspective, the camera, different aggregations, and things like this. Speaking of platforms, there's another aspect that we need to discuss, and it's called the platform approach, but don't necessarily confuse it with the platforms that we were just talking about. It's more a platform as an external entity or externalized type of strategy rather than an internal approach. So it's been very popular in certain private assets. So it's a great way to have a foot on the ground, and it's kind of a foreign office if you think about it, because you have not only your presence geographically and physically, but also you have your specialized expertise access to talent, reputation. It's also a way to source transactions and even further expand the platform by, different mergers and acquisitions or other forms of acquisitions. So, you can think of these platform investments. Many of the Canadian pension funds have one or another example of these platforms, which further expand the reach in these assets. So interestingly enough, you can also do the same or use this concept with your total fund management platform. And why this is important and what are these benefits? So first, you have access to the forefront of technology. So everything that's new, chances are that people who are really specialized and they're the experts in this, they have much better understanding, first access, network on their own to these new technologies. It's also true for new data or methodologies for that matter. And that gets back to this access to specialized expertise, but also it's a talent hub because through these specialized expertise platforms, if you wish, it's also a magnet for high quality talent as well. So you can actually attract talent through there as well. These platforms also, similar to the private asset ones, they can pursue accretive acquisitions or other forms of aggregation and integration, but this time of other, smaller or accretive services and data providers and whatnot. And this is a little bit of kind of a different aspect of it, but having something that's external, in a way, also insulates the total fund framework from any type of internal plights and internal influences which may have negative impact on the whole undertaking with total fund management, which could be change in leadership, budget variations, and any prioritizations that may happen there. Because remember, this is a self-sufficient and commercialized platform. Also, of course, all kinds of internal politics that I'm pretty sure all of you've seen, and why not even instances of hostile takeovers where somebody likes what you're doing and decides to kind of take over what you've already done. So all these things happen, and having an external kind of company and external governance around it could certainly help in many of these situations, but unfortunately not always. So one last slide on this topic, and this time it's about the startup risk management and some thoughts around what you might need to do. So remember, entrepreneurs don't often have the time to document things. They're fascinated with the product, and you're probably fascinated too. And they want to have it in the market and start having paying clients because, of course, it is a startup with not much capital after all. So all these things are there, and they're very, very typical for any type of startup initiative. So from a asset owner point of view, and if you decide to go this direction, what's important is first to close any technological and IT security gaps. See whether you're compliant with regulatory requirements. And this also requires full code documentation. Because if your startup fails, then at least you can acquire the code and further use it internally. So all these initial gaps and close gaps need to be clear, they need to be audited, they need to be vetted, and closing of the gaps will need to be vetted as well. So this is one thing to be cognizant about this startup risk management in this particular type of activity. Then what's also important is not only the IT and the security and the technological aspect of it, but also you have to have an audited and vetted investment process that's related to the very way this platform functions. So how signals and insights are generated, as well as data quality and maintenance. All these things need to be audited and vetted from the investment process perspective. And you might think that, this is certainly very difficult for the startup owner to do, not necessarily for an institutional investor. And it's not money thrown out of the window because, this first, if you do at least the first part of it, the documentation and all these technological and security gaps, what you're effectively doing, you're de-risking your investment. And of course, you don't want to be in breach of any regulations because this leads to reputational issues. So this needs to be addressed as well. But also what's very important is that if other investors will come, whether they'll be co-investors with you or they'll be just clients, they will be much more comfortable, and many of them would actually require this so that they can join either as co-investors or as partners or as clients, for that matter, for the product. So in any case, this is all accretive to the value of the startup. And this is key to your risk management of the investment, as an investment this time, and also to the initial value creation. So let's move from a framework and a process and all these thoughts about the total fund management capability. There is a reason why I was able to talk about total fund management in detail, both from an academic but also practitioner's point of view. This is because this is a road I have already traveled, and it led to a unique total fund management related transaction that I spearheaded at BCI as a vice president and head of total fund management to enable this development of the capability for the organization. I cannot talk about it more for the obvious reasons, but this is an example of a strategic transaction for creating value in the investment management of the organization. And it was done in collaboration and synergy with the private equity team and the expertise of the private equity team as well. And I'm really, really proud that I have enabled BCI for future growth and put the organization on the map among these distinguished investors such as BlackRock, Blackstone, Credit Suisse, Hamilton Lane, CPP, GIC, KKR, Goldman Sachs, to name a few. And this is, of course, the official press release that went on Bloomberg and the major financial press. And a little stylized example of its real implementation at BCI. So looking back at this presentation, what are some of the summary takeaways of this episode 6? So first, total fund management addresses many of the critical needs of CIOs and the investment committees for informed decision-making, but faces many challenges in today's asset-rich, technology and process-poor organizations, which are fraught with a patchwork of processes and technologies which may eventually impact decisions. Organizations need to rethink existing approaches and practices and venture to become asset, technology, and decision-rich fiduciaries of their clients' assets. Most asset owners already have some of these capabilities and have been applying these principles when investing with partners across businesses and geographies. It is now time to look back and apply these same very principles to address any investment decision-making challenges internally. Many examples of such proactive and innovative strategies already exist. And this brings us back to the roadmap of our series. And today we concluded episode 6, the last episode of the implementation part of our roadmap. Next week, we will conclude our series with the final episode 7, where the functional role of total fund management transforms into a structural role, which comes to serve a bigger and better purpose, a vision for the Canadian Model 2.0. Until then, stay tuned and stay safe. Thank you again for being with me today.
Total Fund Portfolio Management Hub. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Thank you, and see you at the Pension Pulse blogspot.